Thank you for joining us this evening. First, let me kindly thank the team and colleagues of BRK Utrecht, Janine Armin, Gwen Perry, Maria Lavajova, and Karin Rolle, Annika Kuhlmann, Annette Bagwati, Andrea Schuster, and last but not least, Bernd Scherer at Haus der Kulturen der Welt for organizing and hosting this event. I appreciate also the effort of making the lectures available via live stream, and my special thank goes to Irid Rogov, who organized this strand titled Infrastructure. Now, before presenting previous projects and our new project in progress, I will give an introduction within the next, hopefully, 10 minutes, and would like to continue with an idea that Maria was pointing out, that the former West, or as Gilroy suggested, the resurgent West, is a device to structure our conversation throughout this week at HKW. Burak and I are departing from Irid Rogov's notion that our existing structures or infrastructures, in fact, may be of a hindrance to rethink further developments. Now, why are we interested in this particular infrastructure and relations of funding and knowledge production, and how funding influences research? Well, one reason is that Burak and I are part of the system and infrastructure that we're investigating. We work in, we create relations, we consume, we share ideas and colleagues, we perform and form this network with visible and invisible features. Male, female, artist, architect, curator, lecturer, student, etc. We are subjects, actors as well, as nodes within the network. And we are, can you hear me well? Yeah. And we're not only part of it with our work, but have been part of it as students. Both of us being trained in different countries of our origin, plus the UK and the US, we feed a network of knowledge production with our EU and overseas student fees, and a market of certificates, masters and PhDs, that are so desired by employers, may they be in Turkey, in Nigeria, in China, in Ghana, or Germany. A system that Walter Mignolo has criticized in his work Epistemologic Disobedience. It is his claim that local knowledge and education systems need to be created as a counter-infrastructure to an overwhelmingly resistant Anglo-Saxon dominance in the realm of education. Therefore, I'm speaking from within a system and a network that I'm criticizing. Burak and I are part of several networks. Universities in the UK, for example, entertain marketing and PR specialists and are brilliant in self-marketing and promotion. Whereas most of the institutions live up to their reputation, some of them maybe don't. Still, we can see the repetition of a belief in superiority. Economically suffering UK universities only survive with their master programs, overseas students acting as cash cows, being counted as full-time, part-time, and so on and so forth. And undergraduate students, in fact, are more and more unwanted as they are economically not that fruitful. Here I would like to come back to what Irid Rogov said yesterday when she was talking about Tate, or the Museum Tate, acting as the, what was it, ultimate infrastructure? By including art from the Arab world, with money coming from Arab countries. The same has been happening now for years in the realm of education. UK and US universities are surviving only through money coming in via students from other countries, from abroad. The London School of Economics even happily enjoyed fundings by Gaddafi. which led to certain consequences once it was revealed. Parallel to that, American universities branched out abroad. NYU Abu Dhabi, NYU Shanghai, NYU Singapore, and just recently opened, and I'm passing it every day, NYU Berlin. AA Summer School Madrid, AA Summer School Istanbul, AA Summer School Beijing, so on and so forth. I'm quoting from AA's website. The AA Visiting School is a worldwide network of design workshops and events organized by the Architectural Association School of Architecture in collaboration with the hosting institutions in each country. The AA is the world's most international school of architecture, with nearly 80% of its 530 full-time students coming from 50 or more countries. Another current example of entanglement of corporate firms and universities is Switzerland, where the private sector is additionally funding public universities, but what is more crucial is that universities share their power and staff with corporate companies. The University of Lausanne shares its president, Patrick Ebescher, in his function as a board member with the companies Lonza and Nestlé Health Science. The latter one funded the university with 25 million euros. In an interview, he favored private university funding in addition to public funding and didn't find entanglements problematic at all as long as they were made transparent. The second and probably more prominent example is the University of Zurich and its entanglement with the Swiss bank UBS. You might know this from the Zurich Appell, an international appeal for the protection of academic independence that was immediately made after these developments occurred in the daily newspaper. Second is another investigative interest that we hold in these established funding structures that promote cultural production and scholarly work. These hidden factors have been mentioned by Bourdieu, who speaks of cultural capital as a non-measurable form of capital. Also, I'm referring to Isabel Graf's critique that in a networked and connectionist world, cooperation is crucial. And the necessity of collaboration in the art world leads to an unwillingness of critiquing each other, as enemies are unwanted and their support might be needed in future. Cooperation, of course, is also linked to value. The value here being the social relation, according to Marx, and the interaction creating the value. Like any other system, the art and education system is temporarily regulated by exclusion and inclusion. If we are talking of an international global market, we have to consider who is funded and how funded institutions are to be included. Current projects, for example, the announced year of Turn, Fund for German-African Cooperation, mean to do well. Reacting to an emergence of several contemporary art hubs in different parts of the African continent, I quote, "German cultural organizations in all artistic fields are called to engage in new forms of artistic collaboration with partners from African countries. The main objective of the program is to provide incentives to German institutions and artists to broaden their profiles with new themes, working methods and perspectives." Without elaborating in detail, it seems that as well intended these funds are, the money that is invested will remain within the countries of origin. Now, one could state that this is intended as it secures the local German infrastructure. But exactly this infrastructure of funding might hinder capital flows and, along with it, sustainable knowledge exchange. Initiatives as Africa is not a country criticize this program. As independent agents are put in competition for funding and are excluded depending on their relationships or included, and are required to be accountable to the authorities that be, researchers adapt their work to funding outlines to get funded. One can observe that all of a sudden, many German curators, galleries, artists, and architects have been very busy preparing applications somehow related to an African topic. Quote, in quotes. Most of them entering this field as non-connoisseurs. Conclusively, funding, knowledge production, and capital remain within the same logic of infrastructure. Just quickly, one last point regarding the production of architecture. I would like to draw on Mark Wigley, who says, think of architecture production as a given infrastructure, and then of the displacement of sexuality and gender. The active distinction of gender can be found at every level of architectural discourse, the division of labor, salary structures, project credits, language, so on and so forth. The question once again here as well is, what is being protected in this space and for whom? Architectural practice is clearly defined by what it will not say than what it says. If we extend Wigley's thoughts, it is clear that the knowledge that is produced is a gendered knowledge. Wigley continues to suggest that we interrogate the institutional mask, as masks cannot be separated from what they mask. Now, I have described how institutions are connected to each other through a variety of interests, from sponsorship relations to shared board members, to social and professional relationships, all of which contribute to an organization's authority, as well as constitute a larger network of institutions which hold more power than their sum. As these relations can be mapped as network diagrams, in order to visualize the entanglement of knowledge and economic power structures, my collaborator, Burak Arikan, will continue to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Füsun. So, hi everyone. I want to talk a little bit about why networks matter this much today. And also I will show some works of mine, like some recent works, let's say, and try to connect that to this new initiative or project we're doing together. Let's see. So, we all know that, I think, more or less, networks exist, since the beginning of humanity, let's say, social relationships, etc., family. But why they matter today is an interesting question, because if you think about it, world becomes just more measurable. This is like, for instance, the submarine cables of how the continents are connected to each other. These are telecommunication and data cables under the sea. And they're all connected to each other through these lines. And when you send a message from one place in the world to another, it actually travels in the physical layer and then reaches to another computer, for instance. Although we feel like it's very for us, it's like almost instantaneous. In a second, things flow, in a very quickly way, and we do even video chats and stuff like that. So, because of these electronic and software-based communication systems, things became measurable. In other words, like if you think about what what's the difference between something measurable and not measurable? It's a very simple and interesting question, I think. So, for instance, if I do right now, I look at everyone here, and I don't know who knows who here at all, some of them only. But if I do a survey and ask every one of us to kind of fill the names of the people that you know here, then this simple survey results in a social map of you here in the audience, right? So now that means you are measured. Then using that map, we can do a lot of things, and I will come to that later. So only in this day and age, networks became this big and global, right? Before it was not possible, and then they are also in our everyday life, like in our mobile phones, in our computers, in our institutional relationships, and etc. Not only digital, but all kinds of relationships in the city, transportation, etc. So we all experience these things, these networks and their effects, probably, from email to e-commerce, from social relationships to banking, telecommunication, television, etc. And we all acknowledge the fact that the world is more interconnected and complex. But did the power disappear at all? Because it feels flat, that, everyone is connected to everyone else. It's like it seems very democratic and flat. But did the power really disappear? I'll go into another interesting project that I made just recently. It can be an interesting thing because so we looked at a map of the let's say submarine lines, submarine cables in the world, and this is a map of the mosques in Istanbul. There are around 3,000 of them. When you go to, if you ever been to Istanbul, but most of the Muslim countries have this quality of life there. Like you have mosques, and every 5 times a day, they pray, they do call to pray, ezan, and these oftentimes what you hear is the echo chamber of ezan. Because they overlap with each other, and you just continue to hear this ezan call to pray sound for, let's say, 10 minutes or something. Although itself it's 1 minute or shorter. So when you look at in detail, I did a measurement of the how much the sound travels from the minaret, where the ezan is being played. If you look in detail, I don't know if you can see it here. These 300 meters range overlap. So when they overlap, it actually constitutes a connectivity, a connection. I thought, and this is actually what you see is the physical, but yet invisible network in the city itself, like submarine cables a little bit in a way, but in a very different mode, let's say. Okay, just to give another example. I want to quote here to Manuel Castells, this famous article. He says, power does not actually reside in institutions, but in the networks that structure the society. And without understanding their logic, we cannot change their programs. And I think we more or less all experience and know about this, by just practice. But we kind of fail to be an active agent to criticize it in a good way, in an effective way, I feel. And it's because I think there are 2 main reasons for this. One is the lack of tools, because tools for analyzing complexity, networks, and things like that are always designed for experts. These are like business managers or engineers, scientists, government, experts and stuff like that. And as an example, like you see here, Obama and the New York Police Department trying to search the bombing attack in Times Square. This is from an image from a news. They use a tool in the back. Their meeting or whatever's happening here is they're trying to, using these relational mapping, they're trying to find what causes or how come this person up there emerged as a bomber or something. And of course, it's also very common, such tools, network analysis tools, very popular in marketing, finance, banking systems, and etc. And so we don't have access to such tools in general. That's one thing. And secondly, I think there's a myth that individuals or individual people, like each of us, don't have enough data about some reality. You know, although I think we are the data itself, because all these systems actually track us, and we know this very well, more or less. So what will be interesting, actually, to connect our individual maps in our minds to each other, to be able to map reality in a more, let's say, complete way. Because we all know things, and then I think it's a matter of connecting these maps to each other. Okay, and so one project that I made recently at Sharjah Biennale right now. It's a survey that actually targeted towards expats to map neoliberal concepts. So from their experience, they kind of answer some questions, and then those questions are connected to different concepts like low wage labor, you know, gender discrimination, things like that. And then in which countries you see those concepts more than the other. So it kind of makes a network map of countries and neoliberal concepts, let's say. Now I will go on with some more pieces that I made in the past 2-3 years, and they will have connection to these ideas. I was invited to participate in an exhibition in Istanbul about institutional critique, this very common, let's say, idea that we always use. So for this I took all the artists' biographies. These are 20 artists listed here, including myself. And I did the research on their biographies to find so let's see. Yeah, I got the group exhibitions they've been to in their biographies. I did collect around 700 unique exhibitions, and each of them I looked for which artists were participating in them. So as a result, if 2 artists participate in an exhibition, it makes a connection between them. And I think this connection is significant because it's about history. You know, you write history as doing these exhibitions, as well as it's personal. You know, you start relationships, and also conceptual because your ideas come together in these shows. So I made a model of these basically very simple artists connected to an artist if they're in the same exhibition. And this map became like a huge one, which has around 5,000 artists' unique names from these 700 more or less exhibitions. And I will now switch to this little map here. Not this one. That's also good. Let's see, where am I? Okay. Yeah. So think about like Google Maps here. I'm going to zoom into it. You know, it may not be very visible, but what I'm trying to show is that these names are all artists, and you just get to look closer. And you know, like Teddy Cruz and Banu Genitol, if there's a line between them, that means they've been into the same exhibitions multiple times, minimum one time. You know, and they're organized through a technique called force-directed layout. So they have imagined this as a spring network of physics. You know, in physics, you have springs like wavy. You know, and if 2 things are connected to each other, and when you pull one thing, the other one comes with it. So all of them are pushing and pulling each other in this, let's say, self-organized network diagram, and then find their positions in the layout. And as a result, what you start to see is these clusters emerging, and also some people are more central than the others. So the hierarchy in this flat network kind of becomes visible, and use that to read them. Of course, like seeing a cluster is interesting in this network mapping story, because if you don't know what's in it, like let's say I'm going to zoom here, I don't know much of these artists, it doesn't mean to me much. But if I zoom to another place where I know a lot, which is like the Turkish scene a little bit here, and some more towards left, you see more modern, from 60s on, contemporary art. And I know these names, and I start to make sense of it. I start to read them. And one basic example is that these 2, like these are big clusters here, another one here. The one on top are younger generation, maybe even like friends here, Köken is in here. And the ones down there are all more older generation, and they are like, they have painting, sculpture, 20th century type of art. And here more like, let's say, I'm not joking actually, yeah. I think that way. Ooh, don't. I'm moving on quickly. We'll take the questions a bit later. Is that okay? Yeah. Now I will switch to this other map, which is here. They were shown in the same exhibition, I should say. On one hand, there's this network map of artists, which I call soft institutionalization, because they constitute themselves, these groups, some kind of a power, which we don't know what it is actually, but we feel it more or less. This another one is a map of, in the same exhibition as I said, is the map of all the companies and tax-exempt foundations in Turkey. This is public data. You know, we can go to stock market and get all the list of art companies and their board members. And I just connect the dots to each other. So a board member can be in multiple companies, right, or multiple foundations. So if you just connect the dots, you see the network of these institutions and connected to each other. So this is like, I'm going to just zoom in right away somewhere. This is one of the oldest foundations in Turkey. It has connections to the Ottoman Empire. And the people in the board, some names are, like most of them are actually very famous people today in Turkey, like from journalists to businessmen to, you know, politicians and all kinds of. And they, of course, also serve in other boards. And that means they actually steer multiple, you know, institutions. And if you, in a map like this, you can basically navigate from one institution to a person, then another institution to another person. It goes like that. If you zoom back, what you see here is that these groups of or clusters of institutions, right? This is something interesting because it's not an institution; it's a cluster of institutions, and they are actually significantly different. You can see, like here, they themselves constitute a type of power, and here in this case, if you look down who they are, I can say this is a big family in Turkey called Koç family. And if I go like see, look, this little cluster, which is so clear, it's another family called Sabancı family. And if you go to, you know, let's say somewhere here, you'll see a cluster of media companies called Doğan. It's a holding company. They hold the major newspapers, TV stations, etc. So families is one cluster. Industrial relationships like textile, media, you know, construction, whatever is another type of cluster. And there's also this ideological clusters, like for instance this one here, this larger, let's say cloud, is they are like companies, if you look down the names, they are known as Islamic capital in Turkey. And so I call them super institutions. They have a different type of power that we have to, I think we have to more do investigation on it, and they of course constitute a bigger power than in, you know, their sum, I should say. Okay, let's move on back to the slides again. Where we looked at them. Okay, so so one more work, and this is another model. What you see is that I was interested in this private data about collectors and artists and their relationships. This is only known, or most of the time known, by the dealers in between, right? The gallerist or whoever does this creates this relationship. And I did a search in Istanbul again in the Turkish scene. There are around 120-something collectors that I can find as names, and among them I reached around 40, 45 of them, you know, by email or by, you know, just meeting them in person, and only 19 of them participated in a project like this. And this was my model. There's an artist and there's a collector. If the artist is in the collection, it's a relationship, right? And of course, one artist can be in multiple collections, etc. And what you see in this map as a result of that research is like different, again, different clusters emerge and different centralities emerge. Some names are, again, more important than the others in this network of artist-collector relationship. And the way it was displayed in another case was like more in a system like that, where you actually explore this network, you know, by hand, touching them, moving them around, seeing, highlighting different parts of the map, and it was more like an exploration mode. Okay. Two more examples. These are not like art pieces, let's say. They are more research-based stuff. Let's see. Okay. Yeah. So I'll just move it here. Yeah. So it's in Turkish, but I'll just describe you what it is. It's basically what we're going to do in Berlin, actually. This is the art institutions, more or less, art and culture institutions, and their board member relationships. We don't have many art institutions in Turkey, so it's quite easy to find data about them and make a complete map of them. For instance, like these are some places, like İKSV is the foundation they make the Istanbul Biennale, for instance, you know. And the board members of them are also board members of other places, which is the Istanbul Modern, maybe you know this place, big Eczacıbaşı family founded private museum. And you see other museums, and their board members are basically shared. So just as an example, you know, it might not mean much to you. Another one is that the sponsorship relationships or the funding relationships. So, of course, more or less, you know, every institution is sponsored by another institution. And if you just look at that, you can just trace, as an example, like Borusan Company, the importer of BMW cars to Turkey. They have their own, you know, art center. Also, they support the Art Biennale, or Garanti Bank, like the biggest bank in Turkey, more or less. They support a lot of different institutions. And I should show you one thing. There's one here, Depot. There's one institution called Depot, and as you see, it has many funders, but they're unconnected. They are on their own. It's like a star. See, it's not connected to any of them. It's an interesting finding, but maybe there may be connections in between them later on. You know. Yeah. So let me see. One thing I should say, you know, while finishing here, is that I think these maps, rather than like, you know, kind of representing a reality, they are think about them as tools that you can use to, you know, maybe modify the reality in some way, because these maps can be used as tactic generation, you know, strategy making, or just navigate, let's say, different types of realities and so. So I just want to quote, you know, to Deleuze and Guattari's famous book, A Thousand Plateaux. They say, as you can see, the diagrammatic or abstract machine does not function to represent even something real, but rather constructs a real that is yet to come, a new type of reality. Okay, so I will finish here, and then maybe short question, 2 minutes. Okay. Thank you. This is good. Ben de.
Those questions to Füsun and Burak now. We have just a few minutes for that.
I'll borrow one. Is it okay? Just come closer.
As I can see, you are really good work, I should say first. But as I can see, you are mapping like Turkey, where you come from. Now you're going to do it in Berlin. Do you have an ambition of like doing a global mapping of a sort?
Yeah.
Can I speak for you? Yes. I think the maps that Burak has done are not necessarily only related to places where he holds local knowledge, Istanbul or now Berlin, but I think they the work that he's been doing at the Berlin Biennial last year, for example, was of course including many artists who are not based in Istanbul or in Berlin. So in a way we were thinking of, when we're looking at Berlin, and as it is an international global art market, there is no chance of excluding international influences. It is, I think that was always also what I was trying to map out earlier in my talk, that it is very much interconnected. So we will not have a chance to exclude other cities, but rather have to include them. And also we would be very interested to get funded by the EU to make a research on the European art market, of course. I mean, depending on different strands that we're interested in. I mean, you know, there are also in the architectural realm things that we're interested in. We talked about this earlier over coffee. You know, for me, a big topic, for example, was the jury and competition, you know, in architecture. And just think of the, in fact, macroeconomic damage that has been done through competition systems in the art world, or, you know, also in architecture.
Maybe just one more thing to that. We can think about Berlin as one of the hubs in a big abstract network. There's no geography in it, just a hub.
Burak, I have a question for you. At the beginning of the presentation, you are talking about how these networks are measurable and accountable. And I saw that some of the networks you created, they look very dense, almost like became abstract. And I was wondering if actually the more networks you have, actually, it is the more difficult to keep track on them. Like they really become abstract, like pure images. And I was just thinking, you know, of the horse meat scandal in UK, where because the networks are also very dense, they lost track. So that says also something about the global world we are living, in a way that it's become more and more difficult to actually to measure and keep a track.
I think it's a comment, right? And what to do with this big network, you say, or something like that, as far as I understand.
Yeah, no, I was just referring to the networks that I saw that were actually very, very abstract, in a way that it was hard to see the connections easily, just because there are too many.
There are two things I can say here very simply. The network maps that you see here in this projection is unreadable, yeah? So that's why I do prints. Prints are very high resolution, right? So you can read every single text in it. But of course, still, it's a big complex. I understand that, and the reason, for this reason, I'm trying to organize workshops on how to read and write network diagrams, yeah? Like mapping basically, and then how to read and analyze maps. And they're not very difficult things to do. So if you come to the workshop on Saturday, right, we will do that. You know, you can learn more about it. Yeah.
Oh, I have the mic. Should I just ask my question?
Go on with the Q&A later on with Köken's, after Köken's presentation, or?
I have a quick question, but can I just give a very quick context for the question? So it's a question for Burak. But I teach in the US, and students always have a sense that there's no further work to be done around gender. That feminism has worked and it's over. It's their parents' generation, and so given that, I was curious about the gender mapping of artists, and I'm sure there's surprises as well within that. I mean, I think there might be expectations of how it breaks down in terms of gender, but I'm sure there must be other surprises.
Yes, just as an answer, yes. That's of an interest, and I think we're going to investigate that as well. I'm just not very sure about. I think we really have to switch on to Kirkan's presentation, and I'm very sorry, but I don't want. Basically, we're stealing from his time, so I think we need to finish here at this moment.
There are so many informal opportunities for exchange.
Yeah, I'm not really able to like finally put the question, but I try, okay? Because there is so much mapping done by, security agencies, FBI's, Facebook. I wonder, how do you think about people that you're exposing in those mappings? I've been at a couple of conferences and I've seen a couple of architects mapping Roma settlements here and there, and they made incredible maps, and this made them later being easily removed, right? So they were really mapping people was counterproductive for the people that were mapped. How do you deal with this issue of ethics and mapping?
Thank you for the question. It's great because I think mapping almost as a weapon as well. So you shouldn't, turn it towards yourself or towards the ones that you want to keep opaque. And that's why these maps are always targeted to an authority or a system or a bigger system than me, because it's a tool, as you said, that is being used by the police for security, for terrorism research, etc., etc. It's everywhere. Yeah, it's so clear. That's why what I'm trying to do here is that to kind of, in a way, like turn it into a civic tool, so that we can use it to actually target the government, target the companies, etc., etc. Well, yeah, I know. Which case we should talk maybe individually, and project by project, yeah.
Okay, thank you very